Hello, I'm Guglielmo de Gregori, and this is my presentation Fun with Prototypes. I'm a game designer from Italy, and I'm very glad to take part in Digital Dragons even this year. Last year, I offered a presentation about creativity and methods to stimulate creativity and even to balance work, life, and creation. In this edition of the event, I want to talk about something more practical while offering my approach to something that is very standard for game industry. Prototypes are one of the most effective to convey the vision for a game designer. So, I will share my experience based on what I've done in studio and during my personal research as an indie developer. For a start, I wish to begin with words of wisdom from Shigeru Miyamoto. I don't think there is any need to present this man is the man who created Mario, Zelda, and many other beloved franchise. And I'm using his words when it comes to prototyping and game creation. You can find the whole Miyamoto speech in the below link. He gave this speech back in the 2000 when he was invited to GDC and he started talking for the first time in front of a Western audience about his career. And I think that speech is seminal from a lot of standpoints. But the main takeaway that I made for me from that speech is the idea that a game designer is not just an idea guy. Um, Back in the days when Miyamoto gave this speech, he also gave a warning to the game designer present in that during his lecture. He kind of worried that designers strayed away from technicalities. They were less technical and more metaphysic, to use a metaphor. Miyamoto stated, on the other hand, the importance for a game designer to have a very technical approach and to be versed in many different skill sets and technical areas. It started with a very practical example coming from a different era. Um, Miyamoto started back in the days where people in the game industry were making a lot of stuff for the first time. And one of these things was, for example, creating games from scratch without a proper subdivision in teams. There wasn't a proper separation of competencies. For example, someone like Miyamoto started as an artist, but he did also design, and he was also asked to, dirty his hands with code. Um, During the progression the game industry over the years, the concept of an holistic game designer was kind of substituted by the idea that game designer was something more theoretical and less practical, and especially when teams are very big. With the renaissance of garage games and indie games, on the other hand, and the rise of smaller teams, game designer all over the world came back to retain holistic vision of their craft. Going back to Miyamoto, Miyamoto made a very specific example. Going back to to the first years of his career, there are two ways to present a problem to a programmer. A programmer will take your idea and transform it into code, into computer logic that will eventually be handed to the player. Okay, so there is this gap between the vision, between what starts in the mind and what is going to be translated into computer language. So there are two ways to state your idea. There is a very shallow way to convey your idea. Miyamoto made this example of an enemy, a pawn, we could say, that randomly search and react to the character. You can already imagine that for a programmer, this is nonsense because it opens a wide range of possibilities. Who is the enemy? What does it mean random? I mean, you can talk for days about the concept of random. Uh, Probably you can write books about the very sure notion of random. And react. What does it mean to react to the character? Who is the character? I think that if I were a programmer, I would find this a nightmare. And this is what Miyamoto said a lot of time before me. And Miyamoto suggested that a different phrasing for such a sentence. The enemy shall change course based on character movement once every 30 game frames, and 1 in 3 times it will randomly select to progress in. You can see a very clear distinction between something that is very vague, is mostly qualitative, and something, on the other hand, which is strongly quantitative. The first phrasing has not numbers. The phrasing that Miyamoto offers to us, on the other hand, has numbers in it. Numbers are at the core of programming. So, with a simple rephrasing of a very vague word, you are offering to the programmer something that is a lot more easy to understand for him or her. So you introduce the concept of third degree frames. It is very specific. 1 in 3 times. Enemy shall change course. It's very, very specific. I mean, there's no end to being specific. Back when I studied at university, I remember one of our professor telling the importance of the how. Because designers tend, especially when you are young and gullible, they tend to forget about the how. So you just say your wonderful idea and you forget the how. So you, for example, say, I want to make this great game with great adventure with knights and horses and beasts and fights and princes. This is incredibly cool in your head, but it doesn't make any sense from a designer and production standpoint because you are not stating the how. So, how the character works, how the swordsman fights with his sword, who is the princess, how the princess behaves, who are the enemies. So, the more you ask questions, the more you are doing a great job as a game designer. So, it's important to shift away from what is just qualitative, what is just inspiration, which is of course important, and go into what is more technical, more practical. There are the worst enemies of a game designer, especially when you are in a team-based environment and you have to meet deadlines and you have to work with other people who have deadlines on their own, and you don't want to lose information, you don't want to lose time, and you want to be a crucial team member, you want to be useful. I think that in every team, every person wants to be useful, and designers in a modern world are the soul, the backbone of a team. But to be determinant for a project, they need to be very technical and to have a very strong technical mindset. So this is what I'm calling the worst enemies of a game designer. The first one is loss of information, because you may have a wonderful idea, but what happens when you can't convey that idea properly? I think there is nothing as sad, as depressing as trying to state your idea and not getting understood. And even Miyamoto said that in the end, capable programmers, uh, a project may go on its way, even if a designer is very imprecise, is not very technical. The designer gives the eye concept. Maybe he's a very genius designer, and people may get away with just the concept, but in the hands of a skillful programmer may become a good game eventually. But on the other hand, I think that especially in a modern world, a designer must be very confident in his skill. He must be very confident in his vision. And in a technical driven world, your idea must be backed up by solid data. Data is the word. There is nothing as important as data for a game designer, because we're talking about systems, and systems are informed by information and data. So you can just go to people and say, just state your gut feeling. I mean, gut feeling is fundamental for a game designer, but it won't go nowhere when we're talking about a production, a real production with a real deadline with milestones. So being quantitative is very, very important. I think a game designer must be obsessed with data. Every kind of data, every kind of heuristic is good. And of course, even gut feeling is an heuristic, is data. So designers need to make this balance between practical gut feeling data and more sheer numbers. That's why I said that a focus on qualitative data rather than quantitative is harmful for a designer, but even the contrary is harmful, because a designer risks to make something soulless. I mean, at the end of the day, a game still is something made by humans, and you need to feel the human touch. So in the last years, were many experiments to create a game by numbers, to create a game out of sheer data, but it didn't work out, because you need to put your soul at the end of the day, because fun is something that is really difficult to distillate in a bulletproof formula. You can make something that is like a unicorn. You can make a perfect game just by using data, but it doesn't mean that it will be fun. That's why we're talking a lot about perfect unbalancement. So not perfect balancing, but something that in its imperfection is fun and is playable. Even from our early childhood, we remember that games that tended on being unbalanced were more fun than games that were very, very strict in their rules. I'm talking about playground games. Later, you discover that even games are funnier when something is a little bit broken. I think that game designers as a craft really resembles other crafts that involve data, but also involve a feeling, a soul. Uh, I can think of cooking. If you ever saw Ratatouille, the movie, Pixar movie, you can say that in that movie very clearly that the mixing up of ingredients is not something soulless, it's something comes for the heart, from the heart. And the same can be done, the same can be said for game design. We love data. We think that Data is going to be crucial more than ever. The field of live ops is crucial for game designer, but at the end of the day, it's the human factor that really makes your game stand out. Speaking of live ops, live operation, it is very important for a game designer to be in knowledge of tech and game platform, which is something that is already misstated by Miyamoto a lot of times ago, because Miyamoto said that he couldn't develop a game without being aware of the platform he was developing the game on. Um, we can think this as a backwards thinking because they cared a lot about the platform itself. You can say that Super Mario 64 was shaped by the platform it was eventually shipped on, the Nintendo 64, of course, because from the idea from the of a 3D graphics technology, Miyamoto shaped the world of the new Super Mario. When the machine was based on touch controls, Miyamoto shaped a game around the idea of motion of the player interacting with the world in a physical way. Translating for our life a game designer in the future years, especially, we need to think as platforms in a more abstract way. I think that it will be crucial to know your territory when it comes to developing games. So a game designer must know what live operations are, must know the technical specifics of mobile phones, the technical specifics of consoles, of PC, of cloud, even even to the smaller details, but because such details can make the difference. Very simple example: if you are required to make a game for a online platform, you need to consider a lot of things. You need to be very considerate of the bandwidth on the of the assets that you are going to create. You can just live in your fairy tale. You need to know that the platform at the end of the day dictates what kind of game designer we are going to create. Um, I will reiterate again about the quantitative thinking. Quantitative thinking also means to think with logic. Okay, so I mean, a game designer is an artist. Miyamoto itself was a graphic artist, a painter. But at the same time, he had a very logic mindset, and you can see this very clearly in games like Donkey Kong and Super Mario, because they're games with a very like clockworks machines, because everything is engineered. There's not even a simple pixel out of it, out of order. So to be very serious about logic, but also being able to shift in more creative territories, is the kind of balance that really makes a game designer capable in his craft. And also, one last point, which is very important in every language you write, is you need to have a good grammar and writing skills, because of course it's important to create prototypes, it's important to create mockups, but writing is vital, because writing is something that can be interpreted by anyone. Mockups can be sometimes very useful for an artist, especially when they're very rough. They can give a lot of information to the artist, but they, for example, can be kind of distracting for someone which is not artist, which is not an artist. For example, an investor may be not be interested in art, so it's legitimate, but it doesn't have the tools to understand your vision if you just provide mockups. On the other hand, Writing is an universal language, and given you speak the same language, of course, and just like they taught us in elementary schools, this is your business card. So if you make a lot of spelling errors, and your writing is poor in tone, is poor also in construction, you are going to make something that is very unimpressive. But fortunately, there are lots of tools on the internet that help you improve your spell check, and so it's not a problem if not your a mother tongue working in a different country. So now we're finally going to start talking about the prototype. I know that I didn't talk about prototype until now, but I really needed that introduction before, because prototype is where everything I've said before is going to make sense. Is where the designer finally can express his vision and make the full use of his logical, artistic, writing, and creative abilities. Without a prototype, you can demonstrate the worth of your idea to the rest of the world, for example. It is very important for a designer, in my opinion, to work on its own legs. You don't need to be an expert programmer when it comes to prototyping. You can just know the basic concepts and assemble something that conveys your vision and acts as a testing tool. So I think that nowadays it's very important not to be shy for a game designer in front of code, in front of technical challenges, in front of game engines, because creating something by yourself is really a superpower. And the more you are become able to create your tools, your prototyping tools, the more you will be able to retain your vision and to make the final game something that is stemming out from your mind, and not something that maybe was lost in translation. I mean, some degree of loss in translation is inevitable. Every craft is about taking what is your mind and transforming it in something that is viable for a product of art. But on the other hand, we will never be happy because what we have in our mind is very difficult to be replicated 100% even on a game, on a drawing, on a poem, etc. But we can try, and the best way to try this is by using prototypes. So you can already say where this is going. We said that we need to be technical, that we need to gather data. So what do I need to create prototype? I need to collect information through prototype. This is because games are complex, they're systems, they're holistic systems, they are more than the sum of their parts. So it is crucial that through a prototype, a very rough interpretation of your game design, you start collecting data. And this is very important to make strategic prototypes. I mean, it's not necessary to make an entire game in a prototype. I mean, it's on the other hand, it is very important to divide your game in a very diverse subset of parts, of systems, of items. And you can also try to tinker with such atoms, which are such skill elements with single prototypes. I mean, of course, we are going to eventually test all the mechanics, all the systems in a single prototype, but you can start small. You can start just like you are in a sandbox, just like you were when you were a kid. You can just start tinkering with systems, and even if you are not very expert in using engines, in using game engines or coding, it could be interesting to start small. To start, I create this mechanic, then I create this other mechanic. I think that job offers nowadays for game designer do not require explicitly a very strong scripting capability. But it's obvious that bringing with you scripting capabilities is something that makes you stand out from the rest of the crowd, and eventually makes you useful in an environment. Uh, you will going to understand that what you write inside a game design document, if it is very precise, very accurate, and is very obviously stated in the how, that the game design document can be translated inside a prototype. The switch going from paper, from the Word documents to the game engine is not very far-fetched. Because if you already think in a very structured way, when you are going into the game engine and you start prototyping, you will find at home because you made a lot of the groundwork before. And Prototypes serve many purposes. The first one, as I've already said, is to gather data. So you get a prototype and you start making your observation. You start scribbling. You start handing out the prototypes to other members of the team and collecting with a very methodic way their opinions. So you create an Excel files. Of course, every game designer has in Excel his best friend. You put in an Excel file all of the observation about the prototype. That is one way to use prototype in a useful manner. This is very valid also if you are independent developer. Even if you are a beginner, it can be very useful to start with prototypes. We just like a shock therapy. You go into the engine, you made a game design document, and you start to put your idea inside the game engine. I think that especially for younger people that start in the game industry as indie developers, sometimes they create collaborations with other people on the internet, and I found over the years that just such collaborations are usually doomed to fail. I mean, it's normal. I failed a lot of times myself as well, looking for collaborations. But if I could go back in time, I'd probably not rely on other people very much, especially if you are not living in the same space. And I'd go for creating my own tool sets of prototype systems. And I think that if you're talking about someone who is starting very small, just like a young indie developer, being someone who can take care of all the aspects that can be very versatile um, is a good strategy. So, other purposes for a prototype are communication purposes and marketing purposes. Even it is very important to state that a prototype is not a finished product. It can be very harmful to show the prototypes, a very early prototype, to someone who is not tech savvy, which is not maybe an investor. He can just say the prototype and say, "Oh, this is sucks. You're selling me a game that sucks." Of course, you know that that's a prototype. You know that you're not making a game with great boxes. You know everything, but other people may, especially where we're not designers, we're not programmers, we're not developers, they may not understand your prototype. So, especially when the prototype is very in its early phase, it's best to keep it for yourself, in my opinion. Of course, it can be also used for marketing purposes, especially when you're independent. I think this is my personal preference. I think that sharing very rough stuff to a social media audience, it can create some kind of connection, because you say 1 year before we were at this stage, and now we made a lot of progress. And even if the progress is not that much impressive, you are going to create a storytelling with your audience, and they say your struggle, your improvements, your progress over the years. And I think that it can be also kind of awesome to offer such kind of content to social media. Of course, if we are talking about AAA environments, it's not very common for them to show prototypes, of course. I'm sharing this as example for classical art. You can see on the left that for this universally famous statue, which is Amore Psyche by Canova, of course, they needed a prototype. What you see on the left is a maquette, is something that is very rough, but it already has all of the energy that you are going eventually to see in the final product. So it's not very different from game design, because the main information, the main essence, the soul of this statue was already even in its rough prototype, if we wish to call it so. And the information was already on the left. Of course, what you see on on the right is the explosion of that impression. It's the ultimate form, to keep a video game term, of what you see on the left. Rules of thumb. The prototype shouldn't be visually polished. So because you're not an artist, and most of the times, and most of the times there are other artists which are paid to do that their job. If you offer something that is if you focus too much on polished, you're going to lose time, you're going to lose the focus of what you're doing, and it won't be useful for anyone at the end of the day, because eventually it's going to be scrapped. On the other hand, as much as rough is what you create, this should accurately convey the look and the feel. I mean, even a stickman can convey the look and the feel of a game. So you don't need to make something incredibly polished to give away the energy of your game. The ideas behind your game. So it is very important to communicate even with artists, because you are a designer. You need to have an overview of everything. It does not mean to be a jack of all trades. It means to be very competent in each area, but being ready to not to allocate your time in a different way. It is very important to be very knowledgeable about every aspect of video game. The more you know, the more diverse is your mindset, the more you're going to be a good game designer. So it's very dangerous to just ignore something, to say I can draw, so I don't give a damn about art. It's a very naive way of thinking, because uh, first thing I can say is anyone can draw. You can learn to draw, for example. What makes the difference is how much time you invest in the craft. I think that as a game designer, you chose to be a designer professionally, at least. So maybe it doesn't make sense that you make a career, a side career as an artist, but everything is possible. And the more you know, if you're a skilled artist and you can take the knowledge and bring it to a game development team. And some concept are universal: composition, color theory, anatomy. If you know such stuff, even if you don't draw every day, but you know this concept, you will make better mockups, better prototypes. I mean, a stickman made by someone who does not know about color theory is just a stickman. But what if you make a magnified stickman, something that is very simple? The crucial thing is that you save time. I mean, you don't have time to make something a polished drawing, but you can make a very stylized drawing, a very stylized mock-up that conveys the look and the energy, and it contains already the essential concept or the aesthetics of the game, for example. Um, Also, when you create a prototype with a game engine, it does not mean that you should ignore every programming rule. I mean, of course, you're not strictly asked to do that, but I think that the more you're knowledgeable, the more you're versatile, the more your job will be easy, and of course more fun. Because I think that a lot of successful designer dabble in many different areas. Miyamoto itself makes wonderful sketches. You can find them on the internet. Very beautiful. So maybe it's not remembered as the greatest as the artist in the game industry, but it's a great. If you see his sketches, they're beautiful. I think it's not far fetched to say that it's also as a very being influenced by Western cartoons, by Disney cartoons, because that energy can be seen in his drafts. So I think also Tetsuya Nomura from Square Enix is also a great artist and a game designer. So I think there are no rules. You can do anything you want, but you have time. You have time constraints. So it's that balance that at the end of the day forms you as a professional. So be scrupulous, but beware of overkill. So it's you going back to this. If you do something like that on the left, you're already a genius. So you can hire people that refine this and bring it to life, this masterpiece. So I think that is very fitting as a comparison. Okay, you can see the first prototype for Journey. It's Journey, the famous game by that game company. It was made in Adobe Flash Player, so a very old technology, and it was top down. It was stripped of all the art and graphics. Um, so whenever you make a prototype, it's not necessary, as I already said, to make something that is visually striking. But if you manage to convey as much as aesthetic information as possible, is important. For example, you in this prototype you can already have an idea of the disposition of the level, or the architecture of the level. So it's a very good prototype. I mean, and of course, you can also say that the more the stripped a prototype is, the more it can convey fun. So if your game works in a old Adobe Flash Player 1.0 window, it will probably work even in a 3D environment. Of course, this is not entirely true because when you talk about architecture in games, you understand that there are elements of a game system that rely heavily on art, on aesthetics, and on creation of spaces. So I think that it is in a modern world, it would be difficult to make a game starting in 2D and bring it into life in 3D. That's why I encourage everyone to use Unreal Engine and Unity as creation tools for prototypes. You can also use Construct Game Maker, which have a very low barrier when it comes to learning curve. But if you make a little step forward and make some study something a little bit more difficult, just like real Unity, you have one more arrow in with you. And of course, other tools of the trade are Photoshop is essential for creating mockups, to make visuals, simple visual programmer art, and of course Word and Excel, because everything you are going to create in a prototype must be documented, must be observed to constant feelings of Excel spreadsheets. So now we're coming to something which I'm really fond of, which are visual scripting systems. Visual scripting does offer to a designer the possibility to create game logic systems and loops through a very intuitive interface. And this does that does not mean that systems like blueprints or bolts are for dummies. I mean, the complexity between the blueprint system and its twin on Unity, Bolt, the complexity is very high, and you need to know programming concept. You need to know programming concept because uh, they are not made for someone with a completely unaware of how scripting works. But they save you a lot of time because I mean, for a designer, it is important to have something visual in front of his mind, in front of his eyes. So connecting nodes, it's very intuitive. It's something that maybe it's easier for someone who for the first time approaches scripting. And I think that when it comes to the learning curve, blueprints and bolts are very they require an understanding on the basic concept of scripting. So you need to know what operators are, what variables are, what is a for loop, what is an if and else. You need to also be aware of best practices of programming. And so they're not easy tool, but we will make your life easier, and we will give you in your hands the tools to create prototypes, even if you're a beginner. On the other hand, Playmaker is easier because Playmaker just works like Legos, so it's less deep than blueprints, but it can be very useful for creating simple prototypes and even more complex ones. For example, I'm using the postmortem from Teen Cherry that use Playmaker for the wonderful game Hollow Knight. You can see that the game loop for the attack of the enemies of the main character uh, are just very easily represented in this state machine sequence. So you just have very basic logic, but it works, and it also provides something that can be retained in the final game. So you can see the state machine. You see that this is just like something that you could write on pen and paper. You see arrows, you see commands, events, dispatchers. So you can see the name of what is happening, the name of the command block, and the outcome and the switches. So you can see here how the different animations are triggered upon an event. For example, we see a raycast here. Then there is an event called wait. Then there is a check of this raycast. There is a check on the raycast, which is when it is true, it does something, and when it's false, does something else. Okay, and then goes back. You can, I mean, if you are a designer with a very strong notion of game loops, doing visual scripting is so fun because you can see your loops, the stuff you wrote on paper, go come back to life in a playable form. So, to end this presentation, I'm just sharing my personal work. Um, I think that there's one or two things I can say about my personal work. One that I find really funny is that I like this image on the left a lot. I mean, it was the first thing I did when prototyping my personal project, and I like this so much. I mean, it's strange because the atmosphere of this very rough, unpolished. Also, I'm using a lot of assets that are not mine, just like the girl. I mean, but it had a flavor, something that I wasn't able to replicate in the when I polished the game more. So I think that sometimes the prototype, the first impression is more pure than the polished game. It has an energy that you may lose. Even I mean, you may add quality, but maybe you can lose the soul. This is very dangerous. And on the other hand, a lot of information can be retained. You can see on the left that on this early prototype, I introduced the idea of AI assistant. It was named Isaac. And when I improved the game over the months, I bought this concept. So you can see that at the end of the day, I kept the idea of AI assistants, and of course it evolved dramatically because it's now it's an entire character on its own. It has a role in the story. It has a role in the gameplay. So, but it's fun to note that something that was just a placeholder, something that I spent a few hours assembling, made its way into the more polished prototype. And I like how the ideas evolve in an organic way. And you can also see that this is the original train for my prototype. This is a more polished version of the train, and this is the current train without post production, of course. And I think that a lot of the energy from this one was lost, and so I think that I will work a lot to keep the coziness of this very basilar scene also in the final prototype. So this ends my presentation. I hope that I left you with the idea that prototypes are vital, that you need to make prototypes, that they are fun, that they are going to make you a better creator, and that they are invaluable assets for you and for your teammates. If you wish to contact me and know more about my work, you can follow me on Twitter. You can add me on LinkedIn. I'm open to every question, and you can check my portfolio. I hope that you enjoy this speech, and I wish you a great event. Bye bye.